everyone, and welcome back to Venus Pages. Today we're talking about Holy Sonnet VII at the Earth Imagined Corners by John Donne. As usual, let's start with a summary and then move straight into the line-by-line analysis. This is another study guide for the Edexcel A level English literature curriculum, so let's get started. Within this holy sonnet, John Donne once again explores the themes of redemption and wanting to be forgiven for his sins. The central idea is of the angels controlling the four winds, the north, the east, the south, and the western winds. And we see that this is quite a contemporary poem, that this is quite a modern poem, because it talks about the earth's imagined corners, and that it doesn't actually view the earth as, well, flat, but rather as round. So it was a more modern idea proposed at the time that actually the idea that we have now, that the earth is round. In this poem, Donne once again expresses his worry that he is worried about the judgment of the final day, that he will not be able to achieve salvation, that God will not forgive him, and at first he decides that no, he can't bear it anymore, judgment day needs to commence now, so God needs to call upon all of the angels to come as quickly as possible. But then he realizes that actually no, it doesn't need to be the judgment day now for anyone other than him. He is the sole person who needs to be judged. He needs that extra time to repent and to be forgiven for his sins. We have an enjambment in the first 8 lines, rather appropriate as we are talking about sins and sinning, so it gives us pause to really think and reflect on our own doings and on our own actions, just like John Donne is doing here. And the structure is familiar to us from John Donne's other holy sonnets that I have already covered in the series, the ABAB, 14 lines, and once again that proximity and closeness to God that would have not been so familiar and so usual in poems of the time, that highlights Donne's very special relationship to God and how he views it as very personal and intimate and the closest relationship that anyone could really ask for. At the round earth imagined corners, blow your trumpets, angels, and arise. Arise! From death, you numberless infinities of souls, and to your scattered bodies go. At the round earth, so at our globe's imagined corners. Imagine because he admits that the earth is round. And he says that we should imagine that it is flat for the purpose of picturing the four winds. The northern wind, the southern wind, the eastern wind, the western wind. We would not really understand where they're coming from, because we see that the earth is round. But if we imagine that it's flat, we understand that it's coming from all four corners of the globe. So we understand that these four winds are everywhere. And he's urging angels forward after we've imagined this wind to blow their trumpets. Blow, blow, this repetition of arise, arise. It's asking them all to come forward. It's like he's calling on not just one angels, but all of them at once by repeating arise multiple times. He's calling all of them because they all need to blow their trumpets from these four corners. And it's that conceit of the four winds actually coming from them blowing their trumpets. So it's the wind of from the angels going like and blowing the wind into the trumpet and scattering that wind. And it's also that conceit of infinite souls scattering at once. It's that idea that we talked about before about those souls rising from the dead and going back to their bodies for judgment day, of every soul waking up and going to their bodies that rest in the earth. Bodies stay, but souls to heaven go. So angels are something that is made out of air, which is pure, and then they're made into something more, because air on its own is nothing and angels on their own are nothing, but angels coupled with air are like a special being, a special angelic sprite. So here are these angels blowing wind, so they're almost blowing their very substance into it, and that is why the souls are rising, because they have something angelic and something divine blowing that energy to them, giving them that force that they need to arise and float down and go to their heavenly, go from their heavenly positions to their earthly bodies. It's a reference to the book of Revelation 7:1, the idea of the second coming of Christ, that all the dead will rise, go to their bodies for judgment day. All whom the flood did and fire shall overthrow, all whom war, dearth, age, agues, tyrannies, despair, law, chance has slain, and you whose eyes shall behold God and never taste death's woe. All the souls will rise, all of those who died in the flood, presumably Noah's flood, a reference to the biblical tale that God has decided that the world needs to be made anew. So there was a massive flood and everyone drowned except for Noah, who sailed on his ark, and he saved some animals, all the animals, because they didn't deserve to die. So it's a reference to that. So all those who initially died in that first making of the world anew, all whom were killed, war or starvation, dearth, or old age or agues, so illnesses, plagues, tyrannies, those who were unfortunate enough to be ruled by leaders who just wanted bloodshed and murder, those who were dead from those tyrannies, those who died from despair, from loss of hope in God, presumably, or loss of hope that their life will get better, or chance has slain, just unfortunately died in unfortunate circumstances, and you whose eyes shall behold God. So there's this long asyndetic list of all the infinities of causes that can lead us to death. It really highlights that death is the only uniting factor, that there are so many ways to die. It's almost like Donne is preparing himself for it as well, that he doesn't quite know how he's going to leave this world, but he is fully aware that there are just so many opportunities to do so, and he's telling himself that he shouldn't fear it because at the end of the day we're all equal. And also again that Revelation 7:1 that I mentioned for the previous stanza, there was also this idea that angels will hold back the winds until God allows them to do so. So they will like hold back their judgment because ultimately the judgment is only up to God, and that the bodies need to be sealed and protected and souls reunited with bodies before everybody's judged. And you whose eyes shall behold God and never taste death woe. So you with your eyes shall witness God, never taste the wrath of death. So those who are still innocent will not suffer from this process. It is really a process of judging and also helping those who need to be helped, in other words. And it's almost a contrast to mention this actually on Donne's part, to say that actually, yes, there will be people who will not suffer, because so far there has been this universality that yes, we will all eventually die, that yes, there are so many ways to die, and that we shall all reunite with our mortal bodies. But then he takes this pause and this step back and says, well, actually, no, not everybody will undergo this, because those who are innocent will not. And I think it's really interesting to reflect on why Donne chooses to do these poems, even as he moves towards the end of his life, even as he takes on a different role as the Dean of St. Paul Cathedral. To me, it feels a lot like he is still very much thinking about everything, thinking very critically. So he's not just preaching what he has been given to preach, but rather really reflecting on what is necessary and what is probably more like the teachings of the church rather than the teachings of God. And so I think that by having that distinction, he really shows that actually, no, it's not universal. We should remember that there are those who have sinned and those who have not sinned. And I think it also shows that he's very much reflecting on what it means to be innocent and what it means to not sin. The theme of redemption and of guilt and innocence he explores in the following stanza. And also it's interesting to note that there's a personification of death as well. So death is suffering and grief, and it's perhaps a reference to saints and martyrs, so those who have died and suffered for God. But let them sleep, Lord, and me mourn a space. For if above all these my sins abound, 'tis late to ask abundance of thy grace. When we are there, here on this lowly ground, teach me how to repent, for that's as good as if thou hadst sealed my pardon with thy blood. The following stanza begins with the conjunction but. Again, we have a reconsideration, a shift of ideas. It's this idea of let us stop, let us reconsider as much as let them sleep, Lord. Actually, hold a second. Let's stop the second judgment day that I have just called upon in the first stanza. I have changed my mind, I have transformed, because it suddenly becomes much more personal. The tone shifts towards the self. Donne turns inwards from outwards. He urges the Lord, notice that it's capitalized, to let them sleep, to let the others sleep. There's a them versus us here very clearly. Us, it's you and me, God. It's Donne's personal, private conversation with God, and them as in those other people who are not currently conversing, who are asleep or not awake yet or not ready to begin judgment. Let me mourn a space. Let me on my own mourn and grieve a little. Let me relive my experiences and get through them on their own. For if above all my sins abound, because if above all else my sins exist, it is too late for me to ask you to be merciful, to be abundant, for me to say, oh, please treat me sparingly, to please be plentiful in your grace and mercy. It's this concern of, will it be too late to ask for forgiveness after I have already gotten there? I should be asking for forgiveness right now before I actually make that journey. And again, it's not just them and us, as in me and God, it's also here and there. There, when we are there, and here on this lowly ground. Again, this contrast between heaven and earth, and again the distance between Donne and God and others and God right now. So lowly, far below the heaven, here on earth. So he asks God instead to teach me how to repent. Instead of doing that judgment day, carrying it out and judging all, and instead of me waiting until the final possible moment and saying, oh, please forgive me for my sins, why should I wait? Please, God, instead teach me how to repent now. Teach me so that I don't make the same mistakes. For that's as good as thou hast sealed my pardon with thy blood. Because I am so confident that you will forgive me if I actually repent, that it is as good as a promise that I will be safe and protected in the judgment day, when those who have not repented and those who are judged as too evil will suffer for it. You will seal my pardon with your blood. It's that idea as if it's like a contract, and it's a contract that's so important that it needs to be sealed. And God's promise to teach him how to repent, God's presence and God's support is enough for him to feel sure that he is very safe and that he will for sure 100% be pardoned. Alright, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed my analysis, and I will see you next week.